Good morning, everybody, dear participants, and welcome to this webinar on artificial intelligence and public procurement. We are happy that so many of you have registered. We have counted 360 registrations from all over Europe and also abroad. So thanks again for being so numerous today. And we really look forward to the very interesting presentations and discussions which will take place today in the course of our webinar. I will start very quickly recalling the housekeeping rules. You have all received them by email. So just to recall that all the participants are on a web streaming only. Only the speakers have their mics and video switched on. You can interact with the speakers by using Slido. Of course, please indicate who you are and to whom the question is addressed. Please note that we have many participants which are not native speakers, so please ensure that while speaking you do this in a very calm, very clear manner in order to allow everybody to understand. We have this time 2 breakout sessions. We have to split a certain point during our webinars, and those which are in the political framework session 2, they will have to change room, while those which have signed for the legal aspect of the of procurement conditions AI will stay in this breakout, in this link, in this web stream. Everything will be recorded. So if you are not able to follow everything of this webinar, you will be able to find it afterwards on our website. We will send you also the link after the webinar about where to find the registration, the recording. So the objective of today's seminar includes, of course, support public buyers into the buying, in sharing also competences and knowledge from a front runner as Amsterdam, discussing also how the purchase of artificial intelligence can be done, what are the bottlenecks, and what conditions can be taken to ensure that this is done in a trustworthy manner. And also to contribute to build trust for artificial intelligence and procurement. So the agenda of today's webinar covers 4 points. We will first have an opening speech from Katharina Napton-Wirlich, our acting head of unit for public procurement at DG GROW. Then will be a moderator, which will also introduce the topic. We will then go to the breakout sessions, which I mentioned earlier, and then we will close up with the conclusions and the wrap-up. Before we start, we have a short poll, which will allow to ice break and also allow you to get familiar with the Slido. And so this will be useful also afterwards for you to see how to raise questions. The poll on Slido will appear, of course, on the screen, and it's about why did you decide to subscribe to today's webinar, whether you want to buy artificial intelligence, do you want to sell artificial intelligence to public administration. We have today, I have to say, many SMEs and startups, more than usual, about 10% of all participants. There are also people which might wish to work on policy framework of artificial intelligence or have a personal interest for AI, which of course is a very relevant topic today. And also there is a final question which is left for other. We wait a bit that some of you start to indicate what is their choice. So it's still a predominance of other, but want to buy and relevant interest on policy framework is getting also more interest. Of course, we are just at the beginning. We have only 10 votes so far, so Normally we go ahead until we have 30 votes around, so it's up to you to speed up the process. Let's see how long it's going to take. We are already over 24, 25. So, very good. We have over 30 votes. I see that there is a prevailing interest on the policy framework, and while the others buying artificial intelligence and selling still have a quite good score. Now I pass the floor to Katarina for the opening speech.
Thank you very much, Ivo, for having handed over to me. I'm extremely lucky to be able to work with these wonderful people on innovative procurement, on innovation procurement, innovative methods, and buying innovation. So today I welcome you to the webinar on public procurement of artificial intelligence-enabled solutions. It's especially important now in the post-pandemic context, because it really gives public buyers the potential to procure innovative technological solutions when they need them to recover from the general downturn of the pandemic. And the procurement of innovation is really one of the most important tools in the economic recovery. When procurement of innovation meets digitalization, public buyers face very specific challenges buying innovative IT. It ranges from the difficulties of choosing the right contract form to start with, to analyze the GDPR arrangements that will be needed, to choose the correct procurement criteria, and to avoid especially vendor lock-in in longer-term procurements. Today, we will zoom in on a specific point on the topic of buying artificial intelligence. Because the use of artificial intelligence can help so much public authorities. It can help them gather information of any kind. It can help them provide estimates. So it can allow smart cities development by forecasting traffic and pollution, and all sorts of other things. It can in general improve administration's asset management. It can predict the maintenance of infrastructure and, not least, render internal processes more effective. The country I come from really needs more effectiveness. People couldn't even work from home because they had to work with huge amounts of paper in their offices. So AI can also help create simulations and scenarios for policymakers to make complex, strategic, and long-term decisions. And if public buyers adopt these methods to buy IE, they can give a powerful incentive to companies to develop those technologies. They can help them mitigate the associated risks and pitfalls, so procurement can stimulate demand and offer trustworthy and secure AI technologies in Europe. And there is still, in fact, a considerable untapped potential for the uptake of public procurement of artificial intelligence. So one of the focus areas the European Commission is working on is to develop and support European actions to accelerate that uptake through strategic, sustainable, and also ethical procurement methods of AI systems. In this way, public buyers and economic operators together will maximize the impacts and benefits of really human-centric and trustworthy artificial intelligence. In this context, just 2 months ago, the Commission adopted the AI package. It includes the first ever legal framework proposal on IA. The idea is especially to facilitate trust in AI technologies, and it includes the 2021 review of the coordinated plan on artificial intelligence, where we really focus on the excellence economic ecosystems. The coordinated plan is a joint commitment between the member states and the Commission, because by working together, we can maximize our AI potential and compete globally. We will put in the chat the link to the coordinated plan for all of you to absorb in more detail on your sofa tonight. But one of the focus areas of this coordinated plan is the public sector, because almost all member states' national AI strategies include actions to stimulate the use of AI in public services. Currently, more than half of the AI solutions in use provide incremental or technical changes to the public sector processes. But member states and the Commission have started to engage in peer learning and EU-wide exchange of best practices on public sector IE. And this webinar is part of it, to just bring it to another level. The coordinated action plan indeed underlines the importance of accelerated innovation across Europe in public administrations. We also propose future actions to support the uptake of AI technologies in the public sector, with a few specific actions to just make the public sector, hope never dies, a trailblazer for using artificial intelligence. And the Recovery and Resilience Facility provides an unprecedented opportunity to accelerate the uptake of IA across Europe in public administrations. We really have to work hard to make artificial intelligence absolutely commonplace in public administrations and to boost those companies who can provide those solutions to the public. So in this webinar, we are going to discuss first what public buyers need concretely to facilitate procurement of IA. Then, what are actually their specific challenges when procuring AI? Two subjects that obviously go very close together. And then, how can we foster the uptake of AI by collaboration and by jointly purchasing AI? So that also means how can we put the recommendations of the high-level expert group on artificial intelligence into practice in procurement? And last, but definitely not least, how can we all learn from each other? And that's exactly what we want to do today in the webinar. So I look very much forward to, and I hope you look forward with me to the presentation of the speakers and the discussions in the breakout rooms that will bring you and us forward in policy making and implementing artificial intelligence solutions. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Katharina. I will now very quickly introduce our moderator, Birgit Koffel Olsen. I have to say we have struggled a bit to identify a moderator for this topic. We had tried to identify somebody with a legal experience, with a very good knowledge of AI and very good knowledge of its challenges. So Birgit Koffel Olsen is a Danish lawyer anchored in EU law and with a PhD in privacy and biometrics. She has worked with privacy and data protection in private and public sector for more than 25 years and is now focused on GDPR, AI and data ethics. Birgit is also involved in a Danish AI project run by municipalities on health and social services. She's a member of advisory boards and panels on new technology and data ethics and was co-founding Data Ethics in 2015, where she serves as chairperson. She also co-authored the white paper on public procurement of AI solutions and services that is accessible in the program. So, Birgit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ivo, and for the kind introduction, but also to you and the team for actually inviting me to moderate this session of today's seminar on public procurement of AI. It's something that I've been working with for many years. It's a great opportunity for me to speak here today, but also to learn from all the experiences from Amsterdam, especially, but also from other parts of Europe and the world. I'm especially happy that you have chosen the perspective of building trust for citizens and businesses in AI solutions that I think is imperative for our way forward with artificial intelligence. But as you heard Katrina said, we are going to also explore the challenges and diving into perhaps the obstacles for moving down this new road of AI and to explore the field a bit. We actually start by focusing on bottlenecks. So the barriers within organizations for start buying AI, for start deploying AI. And I'm going to share some of my experiences in that area. Before we do that, we would actually like you to share your experiences with us. So if you could please go to the Slido, and then we have prepared a poll about bottlenecks, and we will see the results of that immediately. And I think, Anita, is it running? Or can you see it, Ivo? There are responses coming in.
You can, in the meantime, go to Slido. And
if you go to Slido, then they'll
fill in the poll. We do not yet see on the screen the results, but I hope that the poll is already available to the audience. It should be in a second.
And what we are interested in learning is, of course, whether you have experienced bottlenecks in your organizations in relation to the decision-making about buying AI or discussions about the risks for actually embarking on AI solutions, troubles in relation to contracts and so forth. But you will find the questions in the Slido. Here it comes. And we have already reached 38 responses, showing that we have 48% saying that there is insufficient knowledge on how to buy AI. And that is, or now it's increasing to 46. So that's actually a lot. And then we have the next one is no specialized lead buyers in my organization. So there is, it seems, nobody to take the lead in embarking on this new road of AI to perhaps operationalize processes or optimizing processes, predicting behavior and so forth. Yes, thank you very much. And if we go back then to I will share with you my experiences with AI. I have been working with public sector and private sector for quite some years now in relation to AI. I've been involved in the discussions on how to introduce AI, for instance, to job matching processes in municipalities in Denmark, where you have a job seeker and you have open job positions. How do you make a better match than we are able to today? How do you visitate older patients to training facilities and so forth? And if you take the next slide, then what you will see is that I have identified some statements that I have heard during the years. And from those statements, I have divided into two categories. I think when we look at organizations, what I see is kind of two levels of maturity with respect to buying AI. One level is a very low level of maturity, which is also reflected, I think, in the poll we just saw, that we need knowledge within the organizations. And then another one is a medium level of maturity, but I'll come back to that. But starting with what we could address as bottlenecks for buying AI, I think one of the statements that reflect that such bottleneck is the expression, I want one of those too. So there's a hype about AI. A lot of people are eager to start using AI, but at the same time, there is a lack of understanding of the administrative problem in the municipality, for instance, or in state administration, or in a company. There's a lack of understanding of the problem that you are actually trying to solve. There's also a lack of knowledge about AI. What is it? What is algorithms about? How do they work? And there's a lack of insight in the impacts of using AI. So the whole discussion that we're going to have here, and which you will see in the EU that has been addressed by the high-level expert group on Trustworthy AI, is the problem with bias, with discriminatory impacts, how the use of algorithms in different areas of society can lead to marginalization, exclusion, and so forth. And due to this lack of understanding and knowledge and insight, what I have seen is that we actually start buying AI in a very simple procurement process. So we don't integrate the specificities that is necessary for actually going into the field of AI. Another statement that I hear often is law kills innovation. I'm a lawyer by background, so of course I'm not so fond of that statement, but it's out there. And so instead of seeing the legal regulation, the GDPR, and the recommendations for data ethics as a very good framework for actually designing and developing AI within, then it's seen as obstacles. And I think it very much has to do with the lack of knowledge about the principle of data minimization, the use of privacy by design tools, privacy by default, security by design, ethics by design, but also perhaps a lack of considerations about what is our approach to artificial intelligence. How do we integrate a human-centric approach that respects the dignity and fundamental rights of the persons who will be impacted by the AI? And people simply do not see that as opportunities, but rather as obstacles. Another very one-dimensional focus on AI is that to say that we want efficient processes. So it's very much that would lead to the ends justifying the means, and you will avoid performing risk and compliance assessments before starting working on AI. We just see it as a possibility for exploiting data, for optimizing data. And that is, of course, an obstacle too, if that is the only thing you see, because it will be reflected in a very simple procurement processes where you do not integrate the requirements that we have in EU law. And the next slide, please. If we move to a higher level of maturity in organizations, what I often hear is that everything else, the questions that I just raised, have been answered. But now we are going into these more advanced questions saying, how is it that we actually ensure that the supplier will show us a creative, a diverse, and insightful team that will develop the AI. How can we do that? How can we integrate that kind of demand in the screening process, in our criteria, in the contracting phase, and the negotiation phase? How is it that what is our room for maneuvering in this field? Another aspect is, of course, the data quality and the governance. And what I hear is a lot of considerations on, should we have within our organization, should we already have a system for ensuring data quality and have a governance set up? Because before we can start talking about buying AI for specific purposes. And that is something that can stop the process. It can stop the decision-making process, but it can also stop the procurement process, or at least it will prolong the process. The last statement that I have shown you here is that what do we do? This is the higher level of maturity, the buyer saying, how do we ensure that the citizens feel safe? That is as soon as you are on that level, you have started looking at AI from a multidisciplinary approach and seen that it actually has impacts on society and on the individual. And the question that arises, how can we ensure the minimum level of AI skills and readiness within the organizations, within the group of public servants and procurers, but also among citizens? And there's a very good example right now in Helsinki in Finland, where they have started, or providing at least material, so that every citizen can go in there and take a small course, an introductory course to algorithms, in order for them to understand artificial intelligence better. And that is what I often hear with the municipalities. How should we include citizens in the dialogues on the use of AI, and how should that be reflected also in a procurement process? So much about the obstacles, the barriers, the challenges. I think you could probably add a lot more out there. But the idea is today that we also look at very good practices, and to see how it has been done in specific areas and with very good results. And what we will do is we will take us to the city of Amsterdam and learn more about their work with artificial intelligence in practice, in the policy processes, and in procurement. And let me welcome Linda van de Vliert and Jeroen Naves from Amsterdam, who have been involved in the implementation of artificial intelligence in the city of Amsterdam. Linda van de Vliert is part of the Chief Technology Office of the City of Amsterdam, working towards responsible and trustworthy use of technology in Amsterdam. And Linda is the lead for several projects on fair and transparent AI, and she's developing practical tools to operationalize and implement the somewhat abstract concepts of AI ethics in the city's use of AI and algorithms, and for example, through procurement conditions and a public AI register. And Linda is also working together with other Dutch and international governments to further develop these and other tools to global standards for responsible AI. And Jeroen Naves is a Dutch lawyer who specialized in technology and law, and among his clients are the Dutch central government, Dutch cities like Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague, and large companies. And on behalf of the city of Amsterdam, Jeroen drafted procurement conditions for the fair use of algorithms. You will meet Linda right now and learn more about her work in Amsterdam, and Jeroen will be in the breakout session on legal aspects, on procurement and AI. And we're going to listen to Linda now, and she will cover many interesting points. How can public procurement contribute to gain public control over AI, and how does it influence work and conditions? And she will illustrate this with examples of use of AI in Amsterdam. So please, Linda, the screen is yours.
Yes, Thank you, Birgit, and also many thanks for this introduction, but also the opportunity to share our work and hopefully inspire some others to do something along the same lines. As said, I'll be speaking about the procurement of trustworthy artificial intelligence, or AI, but let me first give you some context. So you might know Amsterdam as a city of canals, musea, bikes, or maybe coffee shops. But we are also a technology-minded city, with more than 95% of households having an internet connection, and also many digital companies having their headquarters in Amsterdam. The city of Amsterdam believes in a people-centered approach to technology. So we have a policy framework called the Digital City Agenda that aims for democratic safeguards for citizens online as well as offline. And Amsterdam was also one of the founding members in the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights, in which cities from all over the world work together to protect and uphold human rights in the digital realm at the global and at the local level. This all means that we feel that any technology that the city uses should be used responsibly, including AI and algorithms. We use AI and algorithms on a daily basis in Amsterdam to help us with our city tasks. Now, first of all, what is an algorithm? And there's, of course, much to be said about this, but in Amsterdam, we use quite a broad definition. For us, it's any piece of software that uses data analysis, statistics, or self-learning logic to automatically produce some kind of prediction or advice. So again, a broad definition, and I'll come back to that. We use this advice or prediction to provide services to our citizens or to help us maintain a safe public space. I've brought some examples. So first of all, the first example is parking control. In the Netherlands, paying parking fees has been digitalized. So you can pay your parking fees with an app or at a parking meter, but either way, the information is saved in a central database. In Amsterdam, we use these vehicles that you see on the slide, equipped with cameras that drive around the city and take pictures of the license plates of parked cars. An algorithm reads the letters and numbers on the picture and recognizes it as a license plate. And another algorithm then checks the Dutch parking register, so the database, to see if parking fees have been paid for that license plate. Another example that I've brought is an algorithm that recognizes garbage littering the city. I hope you can see it in these slides, but you see a square around, for instance, the couch, saying that it is indeed furniture. And this helps us to know where to send the cleaning crew. Now, these are two examples of maybe more complex algorithmic systems, right? They already need some image recognition tools. But an algorithm doesn't have to be very complex for us to fit the definition. In our broad definition, it can also be a simple automated check in a database to see if a citizen fits the requirements to accept, for example, social benefits. Now, as you might know, algorithms can be a bit of a black box. Not many people understand how they actually work. Even if you have access to, for instance, the source code, only people with certain technical skill understand how they work. And for a democratic government like a city, that's a problem. For us, it's essential that we can explain on what grounds a certain decision has been made. For instance, when you park your car in the wrong spot and get fined. We should never have to say you're getting a fine because the algorithm says so. So no computer says no for us. Not only because it's the law in the Netherlands to explain government decisions, but frankly, I think it's the only way we can expect citizens to trust us. Now, over the recent years, many guidelines have been published on what needs to be done to make AI and algorithms trustworthy. And for us, the most influential guideline were these guidelines by the so-called high-level expert group on AI of the European Commission. What these and also other guidelines seem to agree upon is that they see transparency and accountability of algorithms as key factors for their trustworthiness. However, these concepts of transparency and accountability were for us too abstract to put into practice. They were not yet operationalized. And although there is a proposal now for AI regulation by the European Commission, which is much more specific on what information should be available than these previous guidelines, as a city, we still need some practical tools to make trustworthy AI an everyday practice. One area where that's especially important is with algorithmic systems we buy from external suppliers. As said, it's essential that we understand how the system works. Think again of the example of the parking control algorithms. If you don't know how the algorithm comes to its conclusion, you don't know why you're getting a parking fine. But at the same time, it's very understandable, I think, that the supplier doesn't want to share any information that would let us copy the algorithm altogether. He would lose his business model, of course. That's why the City of Amsterdam, together with many experts, has developed public procurement conditions for trustworthy AI. These procurement conditions, or I should actually say contractual clauses, state exactly which information should be provided by the supplier, while at the same time providing a separation between information needed for algorithmic accountability on the one hand and company-sensitive information on the other. We do this by separating technical information from what we call procedural information. And of course, Jeroen Naves will elaborate on this in his breakout session, but let me give you a general overview for now. So first of all, we have the technical transparency. And technical transparency is insight into the technical operation of the algorithm, for instance, into the source code. We usually don't ask the supplier for technical transparency, as we understand that is the essential part of their business model. Moreover, even if you make the source code public, again, I've already said, only a handful of people will understand it. Instead, we ask for what we call procedural transparency, which is documentation of all the choices and assumptions that were made in developing the algorithmic system. For example, what categories of data were used to train the algorithm, or whether there are any doubts about the quality of the data, and also what the supplier has done to counter any unintended bias. If you have that information, even though you don't have the source code, you should always be able to understand how the algorithm arrives at its outcome, even if you can't look into the technology itself. In Amsterdam, for example, we use this information in our algorithm register, where we clarify which algorithms we use in the city and how they impact the people of Amsterdam. So that's a public website where the people of Amsterdam can see what algorithms we use. Of course, I think Amsterdam is not unique. Algorithmic accountability and transparency is important for any organization that uses algorithms and AI, not even only government. That's why we've provided the procurement conditions as a standard set of contractual clauses free for anyone to use. You just add the name of your organization and you're at least kind of good to go. You can download them at the link on the screen, and I do really hope that these contractual clauses will help many organizations across Europe to put trustworthy use of AI and other algorithmic systems into practice. Thanks. I'll hand over the mic for now.
Many thanks, Linda, for this great presentation, and also many thanks to Birgit. From this, you understand the level of our speakers and intervenants today. I will just recall very quickly, without any much ado, what are the conditions for taking part in the breakout sessions. If you want to attend the session on the political framework of digital rights, go to a separate web stream. If you want to stay and follow the legal aspects of public procurement sessions, stay in this web stream. Well, if you want to use a slide or to ask questions, please, of course, remember to indicate who you are, what is your company or organization, and indicate to whom the question is addressed. So we will now move to the breakout sessions.
So Linda moved to the other session. So everyone who wants to join Linda's breakout session, well, use the other stream. And in a few minutes, we'll start here with the legal breakout session. So I will start as soon as my sheets are on the screen.
I think, Jeroen, you can start.
Okay, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Again, welcome in this breakout session. My name is Jeroen, as Birgit already gave me a short introduction. I'm a Dutch lawyer, and I, well, more or less worked for several Dutch governments, including the city of Amsterdam, and together with a team of experts in 2019 and 2020, and of course together with Linda, I've drafted the standard clauses I'm going to discuss during this session. We have more or less 30 minutes together, and what I will do is that I will, well, talk you through my sheets in about 20 minutes, and there will be 10 minutes for questions afterwards. So maybe it's now time to move to the next slides, so I can elaborate a bit on the agenda of this breakout session. During this session, I will first, well, give some background. Linda, of course, already explained a bit about the discussions we've had over the last years to come to the standard clauses, and afterwards I will explain you a bit more about the content of the standard clauses. Since we only have 20 minutes, I will of course only pinpoint some highlights. If you have any, well, detailed questions, you can of course always ask them, and well, if I'm not able to answer them right now, you can always contact me afterwards. My contact details are in the sheets as well. And I will start with telling you a bit about it. Well, as Linda already explains, we see in the Netherlands that Dutch municipalities are more and more using making use of, well, what we've called in the standard clauses algorithmic systems, algorithms. And in the Netherlands, we also have to deal, of course, there is a lot of legislation more or less influencing the use of algorithms, especially GDPR. But in the Netherlands, we also see more and more decision of, well, high Dutch courts about governance making use of algorithms. For example, I don't know how it is in the rest of Europe, or in the Netherlands, you have to pay everywhere. Every a real estate owner has to pay a real estate tax every year based on the current value of the real estate, of your house, more or less. And the value is decided by local governments, municipalities, and we see more and more municipalities making use of external algorithms of companies to decide the current value of real estate. And there's one interesting decision of the Dutch Supreme Court and the Hoge Raad, which says, which is a case where a civilian said, okay, this is not the value of my house. How did you come to this value? And the municipality wasn't able to explain how the algorithm used when deciding about the value of the real estate, wasn't able to explain how it works. And the Dutch High Court said, well, if you're not able to explain how the algorithm works, the decision based on the more or less the advice of the algorithm is invalid. So we see, and this is one example, but we see many examples of case law where Dutch judges call on Dutch governments as saying, well, when you're using an algorithm, you have to be able to explain how this algorithm more or less works. Well, this sounds, of course, very logic and easy, but in practice we see that it isn't. So the standard clauses are based on this ID and are, of course, written for the situation where, the city of Amsterdam or any other Dutch municipality buying a algorithm from an external contractor, and this can be in all kinds of forms. So not only buying a standard off-the-shelf product, but they can also be used in a situation where an algorithm is specifically developed for the city of Amsterdam. I will later in my presentation, I will tell you a bit more about the scope, but there are two important things to know about the standard clauses. Is first of all, the standard clauses do not only apply to what we call AI or machine learning, but we used a very broad definition of algorithm to ensure that, when applying these terms and conditions, you don't want the discussion, is this an algorithm or not? Is this a smart system or is it just a very old-fashioned system? So we used a very broad definition of algorithm, and I will show you it later in the presentation. And we focused on the impact of the decision, which is based on the algorithm. So we focused on decisions, and we actually said, okay, these terms and conditions only apply in the situation algorithm is used when making decision which has which affects citizens to a significant extent. And the reason why we use this scope and these definitions, I'll show you later in the presentation, is that, of course, in all kind of IT products governments are buying every day, there are more or less algorithms included. And these terms and conditions are, of course, specific written for the situation where, there is, for example, a risk or for discrimination. So the terms and conditions, part of them can be used in all kind of these situations, but the terms and conditions mainly focus on these kind of situations. As Linda already explained, the standard clauses are based on mainly the ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI. And now, of course, there is a new a regulation, and the question is what it will look like when it is in a final version. But at a certain point, I expect that we will write a new version of the standard clauses when we use definitions which are similar as in the regulation. And as Linda already explained, the standard clauses are available online. You can use them, and you can also use part of it, so just copy paste. Okay, let's move to the next slides. As I already explained, the scope of of these standard clauses mainly focus. We use a a broad definition of algorithmic system. So not only AI, but all kind of software which used, more or less uses data analytics or statistics fall within the scope of the standard clauses. And the most important definition is on the next slide, and it's about the decisions, because we want to focus on the impact of the algorithm. And of course, experts will see that those words to a significant extent more or less are similar or comparable to the words used in Article 22 of the GDPR, which is about automated decision making. We of course thought it was a good idea to use similar words, because we of course these terms and conditions do not only apply to algorithm using personal data, but they should apply in similar situations. Maybe it's good to move towards the next slides, because during this presentation I want to give most attention and use most of the time to discuss the topic of transparency, because that is, of course, we had we had discussions for 1.5 or 2 years with a group of experts. And I think most of the time we were discussing about definitions, and transparency is, of course, in many cases crucial. I already explained to you a bit about the Dutch case law, which requires governments to be able to explain decisions based on an algorithm or based on AI. And as Linda already explained, we were, of course, on the one hand, for a government, it's really important to be transparent. We had this case law in the Netherlands, we have the GDPR, but on the other hand, we also had the city of Amsterdam, who just said, okay, for us, transparency is key. For us, it's part of the democracy that if you use an algorithm, you are able to explain how it works to the citizens of the city. But on the other hand, we of course, in this situation, we have to deal with suppliers. So we were searching for some kind of balance between the interests of the city and the interests of suppliers, who more or less we have to deal with their trade secrets, their IP, and of course their opportunity to create business and to be able to sell the algorithm to other governments as well. And therefore, in the end, we came with a model in which we used 3 forms of transparency. And the first one is procedural transparency. And as Linda already explained in her introduction, procedural transparency is, and it's good to know that we divided. We used 3 forms of transparency, and of course, for every form of transparency, there different rules apply. And the first form is procedural transparency, and it's actually the kind of transparency which should always be there. So every supplier in all kinds of situations has to provide procedural transparency and hand over the information which is named in this definition towards the city of Amsterdam. And as I'm not Linda showed the picture in her presentation, city of Amsterdam is using a algorithm register, and the idea is that the information which is provided in the situation of procedural transparency can be part of this register, which is a public register. So everyone should be able to know certain information about the algorithm. And this is in this definition, we mainly focus on, well, the choices made when developing the algorithm, what kind of data, which processes, which were the humans involved in the process, and we separate procedural transparency from what we call technical transparency. And technical transparency is more or less, well, all the technical information which was involved in the process of developing the algorithm. So it includes the source code, but also the data used, and, well, information about the way how the data was edited during the development process. And well, the idea is that, of course, technical transparency is also very important, but from the purpose of more or less also protecting the trade secret of the supplier, more or less, because to a certain extent, technical transparency should only be provided in, well, specific situation. For example, during an audit. So the city of Amsterdam has the right always procedural transparency. All this information needs to be provided towards the city of Amsterdam, and they can put it in the register, so everyone can see this information. Technical transparency only in certain conditions, and for example during an audit process, which can also be. Well, you can also, of course, use NDA arrangements when you're part of this audit process. The third form of transparency is what we call explainability, and this refers, of course, also to these decisions of the Dutch High Court. Well, it's critical and it's necessary that under all circumstances, the city of Amsterdam, when making a decision using an algorithm, could explain towards the people who are involved in this decision how the algorithm works. So, well, we created quite a broad definition, and we had a few challenges. And one of the main challenges was that it's of course it's easy for us to say, well, you should explain how an algorithm works, but if you ask this question to a developer, he will say, well, it's difficult to explain. So it's not always so easy to pinpoint exactly why a decision, why an algorithm came to a certain outcome. So therefore, in the definition, we used, for example, what that the supplier should be able to, to give a clear indication of the key factors. So not why an algorithm came to a certain decision, but what the key factors were. So it's slightly different and a bit more broad. So you can see, well, in many situations, it's more easier to say, okay, those are the key factors, and not exactly giving, okay, this is why the algorithm came to a certain outcome. And of course, what could be the counter input? So what changes should you make in the input to give a different outcome? Of course, these three forms of transparency, more or less can be let's see. So there can be some kind of overlap between these different forms of transparency, and in the standard clauses, is decided that in any situation, you should be able to explain how the algorithm works. So this explainability is always the highest form of transparency. So if the obligation to to explain how an algorithm works, if it requires technical information, so information which is part of technical transparency, well, the supplier also needs to provide this technical information. Finally, and before we go towards the questions, I think we will skip the part of the quality of the algorithm, and I will tell you a bit more on continuity, because in every IT project, continuity and vendor lock-in are huge risks. And what we see when buying AI or when buying algorithmic system, or we of course mainly focusing on machine learning, is that the situation is a bit different from what I would call normal IT or old-fashioned IT. Of course, we see that the value of data is becoming bigger every day, I would almost say. But we also see that the importance of data for the continuity of the use of algorithm is even greater than with other IT. And I can use an example. I'm, for example, working for the Dutch central government, and they've created an algorithm for bridge maintenance. And what they more or less do is that they use drones, and these drones make 3D models of the bridge, and afterwards the algorithm is able to see whether there is something wrong with the bridge, whether there are broken parts or not. For this Dutch government, the value of this 3D model is much greater than, for example, the algorithm. So when you are drafting your contract with your IT supplier, who is going to create the 3D models or create the algorithm, or even both, it's very important to focus on what I've called data ownership. You don't want to be in the situation where the contract ends, and you have to make new arrangements about who owns these 3D models, for example. So this is what I want you to tell during my presentation. I think now it's time for questions. So let's see if there are any.
Anna? Okay, so first question for Jeroen. What are the public procurement procedures that are most used by the municipality of Amsterdam to buy AI, and why?
Yeah, so it depends a bit. What we of course, as I already explained during my introduction, is that we see the terms, the standard clauses can apply in several situations. So they can apply both in the situation where the city of Amsterdam buys more or less a off-the-shelf product, and in this situation we see that more or less the standard procurement procedures are used. On the other hand, the terms can also apply in the situation where an algorithm is developed by an external supplier, and in this situation we see that more that other forms of procurement procedures are used, which allow the city of governments which gives some more space for negotiations.
Thank you, Jeroen. A second question, it's rather technical. Machine learning algorithm cannot be explained. It is a black box that looks for hidden problems in the data.
It's not really a question, right? No, but it's a very good question. And as I already tried to explain, we worked in these procurement conditions with a large team, which included, of course, a lot of machine learning experts as well. And so we tried to find a solution for this problem. And the solution is that that you don't explain exactly why a certain outcome came from a machine learning algorithm, but that you indicate which were the key factors for which created more or less the outcome, and that you've also focused on counter input. And well, at least these IT experts showed me told me that this should be possible. And even more important for the city of Amsterdam, when it's a completely black box, and I disagree to certain, of course it tried to a certain level, but of course it's not completely a black box. But when it would be a completely black box, well, the city of Amsterdam don't want to use this algorithm, or at least not in the situations where, well, made which affect citizens to a significant extent.
Perfect.
So it's of course also a choice, and well, we have to deal with this legislation or the case law in the Netherlands I explained to you about. But of course, also GDPR requires some forms of transparency, and when we're moving towards the introduction of the regulation on AI, well, there will be more rules on transparency as well. Okay, next question.
Horizontal in-house procurement or cooperation with other authorities to buy AI is used in your country?
Yes, it's of course. I'm just a simple lawyer, but what we see in the Netherlands, there's a lot of cooperation between all kinds of governance, between public and private sector actually, and it's most of the algorithms which are currently developed are more or less a combination of in-house AI experts and external experts. So I'm not sure if it's the answer to your question, but if you have more questions, just contact me or contact Linda, who knows a lot more about it.
Okay. One more question. Who holds the risk of potential cyber attack, the supplier of AI or the municipality?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because of the lack of time, I skipped the topic of about the quality of the algorithm, but it depends a bit on the situation. But in general, I would say that there is an obligation for the supplier to, create some level of protection against cyber attacks. Of course, the risk, you can never ensure that there won't be any successful cyber attack. So part of the risk lays with the supplier and part with the municipality, of course, because it's always there. And also when you look towards GDPR, there is an obligation to take certain security measures, but there's not, of course, not a complete hey, you're not the complete holder of the risk as an external supplier, at least not based on these standard terms. Let's see. Yeah, so that's a good question. Business continuity. So what we did is that we. So one of my favorite topics. I'm not sure how it is in the rest of Europe, but I assume it's more or less similar as it is in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we don't have some kind of data ownership, or at least not in civil law. Of course, you can have certain rights to data based on the GDPR, but there is not some kind of thing that you can own a house, but you can't own data in a similar way. So, of course, there are several measures taken in the standards clauses, but one of them is that we created more or less a contractual data ownership. So you have all kind of rights towards the data that are used when creating the algorithm. And we also, introduce some obligations which are more or less standard. There's some kind of exit obligation. So the obligation for the supplier to, assist the municipality when it's moving towards the next supplier, because that's of course the situation where you are in as a municipality. You have to deal with procurement law. So at a certain moment, the contract with the supplier ends, and you. Yeah, either you're going to use the algorithm yourself, or you have to start a new procurement process, and with the option for selection another supplier. For me, it's difficult to read the last question.
No, I think that we have to close the session. For those whose questions have not been addressed, then just for you to know, we'll come back with answers to your questions following the webinar.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And welcome back to the plenary. I think we should wait a minute or a half to have the other breakout session participants back. Could you confirm if everybody is here?
I think it's fine. Yes, Birgit.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see it on the screen. Thank you so much, and welcome back. I hope that you have good discussions. I saw both presentations more or less and heard several of the questions. What I'm actually thrilled about, or very inspired of in the Amsterdam model, is that you have created this framework, the digital city agenda, and then operationalized it into this legal tool that we can all learn from, because it's actually accessible. And what I think is marvelous is that by creating this framework and overarching principles and values of human-centered democratic principles, it has to be a free city, an inclusive city. It has to be to the benefit of all. It has to be fair and just. And then the technological responsibility, and especially the transparency. By building these overarching principles and putting them up in this digital city agenda, and then at the same time reflecting it all in the procurement process, is I think a really fantastic example of how law and policy and behavior in society goes hand in hand, and we can make it go hand in hand, and then actually succeed in having these multi-layers projects and processes where you comply, but at the same time fulfill a lot of societal demands. I noticed also that you had this, that was in your presentation, Linda, that it actually says that you stress the digital literacy of the citizens. So it's a very, seen from my chair, it's a very inclusive project. And there are a lot of good ideas, I think, for all of us to learn from. But let us hear Anita and Carmen. Anita, you were in the breakout session with Linda, and Carmen was with Jeroen. What was your observations? Let us start with Anita. What was your observations during the breakout session? Oh, okay. If Anita is not here, then we can start with you, Carmen.
Yeah, start with Carmen.
Okay.
Please.
So we had a very interesting presentation on the legal aspects of Amsterdam clauses. We were explained that they are based on a very broad definition of what an algorithm is. So it's not only it does not only refer to self-learning machine, but also to other sorts of data analysis and logics. It's also based on a large definition of a decision, so it doesn't limit to an administrative decision, but more like factual decisions that have a real impact on the citizens. And then we focused on the various types of transparency. This obligation of transparency, it doesn't only stem and covers what the obligations from the GDPR, but also Dutch case law that highlight the importance of authorities, the obligation of authorities to be able to explain decision taken by algorithm towards citizens. And also because in the end, transparency is key for the administration to be accountable and transparent. And the three types of definition of transparency are meant to ensure a balance between the interests of suppliers and accountability and transparency obligations of the administration. So we have what Linda already had mentioned in the previous presentation, the procedural transparency, which is the kind of by default transparency, and it has to explain how the algorithm works, the process on which is it based. The technical, that it's on a need-to-know basis, that is, for example, in case of audits, so it involves disclosure of source code, technical specification, data used, and so on. And then the very large transparency obligation of explainability. So it's key factors of why an algorithm came to a certain conclusion. And then we had a number of, there was also the need to ensure the continuity of the algorithm after the life of the contract itself. So there, Jeroen highlighted the importance of data ownership and arrangements that have to be thought beforehand and put into the clauses to ensure this data ownership after the life of the contract. We had a number of interesting questions. One of them was, which is the procedure that is most used by Amsterdam to procure such AI. And the answer was that it depends on the algorithm used, because it can be something that is already existing on the market, so you need a more simple procedure, more open procedure, or then you need a supplier to develop something for you, and then, of course, you need something that allows for more margin of negotiation. We discussed about horizontal in-house procurement cooperation in Netherlands on AI. There was a very interesting question about the impossibility of machine learning algorithms to be explained. And Jeroen explained that basically technicians ensured that there has always to be a certain level of explainability to understand how the algorithm reach a certain conclusion. I think I covered more or less. Jeroen, please complete me in case I missed something.
Perfect, thanks.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Let's go to Nita and hear about the breakout session with Linda on the policy framework.
Yes, thank you, Birgit. In our breakout session, we had a nice presentation from Linda about how AI clauses are part of the digital rights framework. She emphasized that digital rights are human rights. And the breakout session mostly was how can we put words about these human digital rights into actions. So there were interesting questions how to do this in practice. And there was questions about how do you involve suppliers in implementing these contracts? How do you use the feedback of citizens and how these processes are being done in practice? Other questions were relating to data and privacy policies. How do you integrate that with the clauses and how does that work in practice? I won't explain, but invite others to watch back, of course, the answers of Linda in the web stream that will be published online. Other practical questions like how do you keep the clauses updated and how actually do you organize this procedural transparency, also referring again to the AE registry. And so it was very practical answers about how to implement these clauses and how to use them for your organization. What do you need to organize around these clauses to be using them? So if you're interested in that, I would surely invite you to watch again the breakout session on political rights and see how you can introduce the political framework on the digital rights. And that, I think, is a short summary of what discussed in our breakout session. So back to you, Birgit.
Thank you very much, Anita. I actually think it's very fascinating that in the span of 20 minutes or so, have been able to, based on your very inspiring presentations and with the questions from the audience, have been able to dive even further down in the complexity of this area. So one thing is on the overall and political level to combine the legal approach with a more cultural approach, a political approach, and then seeing how is it actually possible to work with this in specific work processes within the municipality, within the city, on the political level, with the procurers, with the people who are engaging people in this development. So I do think that we have seen that the procurement perspective can actually, and I'm happy about that, the legal perspective on this can actually spark a process towards a successful implementation of human rights, digital rights, with new requirements and demands for providers of AI solutions and services. And then this third element about involving the citizens, having their feedback, having their contributions also to this process. So I would like to thank you very much, Linda and Jeroen, for some very interesting presentations and also for opening up for new avenues that we can visit in the future and find responsible solutions to. And thank you also to the participants for all the questions that allowed us to dive a little deeper into all the challenges but also all the fine solutions that have been presented here today. So thank you very, very much for that. And we'll go back to Ivo.
Many thanks, Birgit. Many thanks to our speakers and to the participants in the breakout sessions. I really hope that you have enjoyed the breakout sessions. I found them extremely lively, extremely interesting, as it was already pointed out by Birgit. I think that we have seen a very interesting experience here from the first movers in this area, and this already allows us to connect a little bit some very important dots. The Commission has adopted this new action plan in April last year, which of course it puts a very strong emphasis on accelerating innovation and fostering the uptake of artificial intelligence by public administration. I think that the public sector has a very unique role to play in this respect, to incentivize the take-up of artificial intelligence, to create the relevant conditions, and also to create maybe solutions in its own right, which lead to a trustworthy and artificial intelligence. I think it's all very important for us to bring together the various communities which are involved here. The first one is the one, of course, of buyers, which was the mostly involved today in this webinar, but also those of suppliers, those which comes from the technical sides. Each of these community speaks its own language, has its own objectives, its different needs, and it's very important that these various community stakeholders speak together. We on our side, will link very closely with our colleagues of DG Connect, which are on the lead of these files, for the development of minimum capabilities for algorithm, the so-called MIM, which is a very important work providing, let's say, the technical foundations for interoperability. To conclude, I think that the discussion of today shows that we are just at the beginning of something. It's certainly not the end. We really want to continue supporting public buyers in purchasing artificial intelligence in a trustworthy and ethical way. And of course, here it's very important, as we did today, to exchange information, to exchange experiences on this topic. And we will certainly continue to do that. So we will also think about what's the best way to continue. And we are also very curious to hear from you what could be the next steps. And in this respect, we have a very last poll, which could be, what could be, in your view, the follow-up of this webinar. And I hope that the poll will appear on your screen. There are various options which are mentioned for your choice, a series of webinars on the different aspects of buying AI, the creation of knowledge, and an action group of buyers wanting to buy AI, specific trainings on buying AI, more general exchange on the procurement of ICT, which goes beyond only AI and includes other issues, like, for example, buying cybersecurity, or a creation, for example, European buying community of AI practitioners. As we did before, we wait a little bit that there are a few further questions coming up. I hope that you are able to vote and that there are no technical difficulties. Apparently, the votes are getting on a little bit slowly. Maybe the system doesn't yet use AI. It's slowly growing. 5 answers so far, 6. So far, 16 answers. I see that the answers are all pretty balanced. There is a little bit higher interest for general knowledge on procurement, purchase of ICT, but also training of buying AI. Seems the solutions, the options which are suggested, which have found more interest in participants. Let's get up to 30 answers, and then we will skip to the really technical, practical elements of this workshop. I think we are done, so that's very good. Let's move to the final slides. So the first one is regarding the European Innovation Procurement Award of 2021. The deadline for submitting proposals is the end of July. There are 3 different categories. The awards are monetary prizes for the winners, 75,000 euros, and 25 for the runner-up. I invite you to bid if you have developed an innovative solution using a public procurement. The second one, and the following slides, should concern the guidance on innovation procurement, which was adopted last Friday, 18th of July. It's the update of the previous guidance of 2018, which includes many, many new examples and many new relevant practical guidances for public buyers. In order to, let's say, promote the guidance, we also planned a series of webinars, a cycle of webinars on innovation procurement. The first one will be on preliminary market consultation and will take place on the 30th of September. As you see, we'll try to cover various topics: preliminary market consultation, connecting to the innovation ecosystem, the competitive dialogue, IPR, and risk management. And I hope you will find them interesting. You will get the link, and promotional campaign will start soon of these webinars. And then, to conclude, of course, you will receive today's recording by mail, and you can always join for further information on this activity, the group on agents of innovation procurement, where we normally post our information. The last thing, in order to, we invite again to go to Slido and to express in just one word what is your take of this webinar, which will appear in a word cloud. And in the meantime, while the word cloud is being uploaded, I would like first to thank our speakers, Linda and Jeroen, and of course our very brilliant moderator, Birgit, for the work done. And also I would like also to really thank the team for the great work done, starting from Marie de Vassege, Carmen Matei, Anita Port, Samita Bussetta, Sarah Tigert, Laura Bromfield, and of course our boss, Katarina. and Anna Lupi, of course. And Anna Lupi, sorry. So we see very positive, so far very, very interesting and positive feedback, which is always good for the morale and for encouraging us to pursue on this work. And on this, I think we will slowly fade out from our, maybe once we get up to 20, 25 answers, we will fade and close the webinar. So many thanks again for all those which have participated.